Hello, everyone. Welcome to Forum Friday. Today I have Mark Florke. Hi, Mark.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you again, Lynn.
So welcome everyone to today's Forum Friday. We are going to go through the questions that are in the forums, and hopefully, me and Mark do a little bit of more of a deep dive into them.
hmm
So, how is it going on the forum, Mark? How many members do
It,
we have now?
actually, we also keep growing. The conversations keep coming. We are just over 2,600 members right now. And what is really nice about it, the most exciting part, is that over 60% of the members are actively engaged on the channel. So that is really tremendous. So we have like around 1,600 members who are actively engaged. So lots of conversations and questions and answers, and it's really interesting.
That's awesome. Uh, okay, so I am on live
Mhm.
on LinkedIn. If any of you have any questions, just go ahead, go to LinkedIn and just type in your comments and questions. Otherwise, just give us a thumbs up. All right. My first question, Mark, is on the application on the top of buns. What
Mhm.
can be used on the top of the buns to make it look darker and more attractive?
Yes, we have a conversation that was started with a great image to help. Always I always reemphasize: ask good questions, you get good answers, right? And so they're wanting to make a nice dark brown kind of bronze color on their bun, much like a pretzel, but without making a pretzel bun. So it's still very similar process as what you use. You use caustic for that. So either you use a food grade lye that gets sprayed on or that get dunked in, or you can make your own for small quantities, which is you heat sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, at boiling point at a sort of around 200 degrees for an hour, and then you are left with a just the sodium carbonate, which is also alkaline enough to be act like a lye. So you can put that in solution and then brush that on, and that'll what it does is it etches the protein. It makes the protein, that Maillard reaction, even stronger, and gets it really nice and deep bronze brown.
Right. And that's a great suggestion because if you understand the Maillard reaction enough, you would know to manipulate that pH
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
better than just adding sugar or adding, more egg proteins into the mix to make it darker. Just use pH.
Yep.
That's great.
And
That's
yep,
awesome.
there's a company called Red Arrow that sells a product that does the same thing as well.
Oh,
Right. Yep.
interesting. Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. Let's talk about falling number. What is falling number and why is it important in croissant production, Mark?
Well, falling number is, of course, the amount of enzyme activity we have. So when your falling number is above 300, there is very little enzyme activity. And why that's important is that you need the enzymes, particularly the amylase enzymes, to break down the complex carbohydrates into simple sugars for the yeast to digest so it can ferment readily, right? So in things where you're having a long fermentation like croissanto or with baguette, you have the long poolish fermentation up front as well. You want to have enough enzyme activity to keep that going and bubbling. That produces the flavor. It produces also effects on the gluten to make the gluten nice and extensible. And so it's really important. So a member has posted that they're
Uh-oh. Did we
having
lose
issue
Mark?
getting a consistent phone number. How should they achieve that? Mhm.
We you got cut off a little
So
bit.
the oh,
And
sorry.
yeah, so you said let's go back to where you left off. A member was contributing a comment.
A member is getting a flour that is a high falling number, so there's little enzyme activity,
Mm-hmm.
and they are using a malt flour to an organic malt flour to get that enzyme activity. And so they're kind of wondering how can they regulate this, right? Even though the malt flour might be a little inconsistent in terms of the falling number of the malt flour being up and down a little bit, the amount you're using is so small. As long as you stay consistent with that, you'll get enough activity in your dough, because you're only using between 1% and 4% of the flour weight. So as long as you find a happy medium, like if it's 2%, stick with that. It'll be consistent for you and give you the fermentation flavor and results that you need for processing.
And I would also like to emphasize that when you do croissant dough on a batch to batch scale, you can easily control those things so much better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if
Mm-hmm.
you're going up into a larger croissant production, these are the small little nuances that actually a little change in the falling down is going to change everything in your production process, and then waste goes up, you know,
Yep.
production numbers goes down. So
Mm-hmm.
these are the little things that are really important for you to look at as a baker as you finalize your flour specs for even something simple like croissant production, which is really
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
simple.
Yeah, because
So
otherwise the only way is to do the calculations or test, blend the malt flour with the flour and do a falling number test.
correct. Yeah. And I would like to add to that. I'm at a wheat marketing center today. This is the cracker line, and this is the ramen line. And they also do falling number tests if you want to send samples into this facility. All
Yep.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Send us a note at support@bakerpedia.com if you are interested in their services. So
Yep.
next, I would like to talk to you about this issue with sugar-free angel food cake. How's the discussion on that?
Yes, well, that is one of those magic, elusive creatures. Right? We all too often think of sugar as simply something that sweetens, and it has just so much important functionality when it comes to whipping egg foam, for example, for something like an angel food cake, where we need to foam the egg whites nice and light and fluffy. The sugar provides the friction to help form all of those bubbles. The sugar also then starts to dissolve in the water that is there and help provide like a scaffolding, like a structure to hold that foam up so that it doesn't collapse when you mix the pastry flour or cake flour in. So when you take that sugar away in your sweetening, something with, say, for example, stevia or other sweeteners, you're not getting any of that functionality. Because something like sucralose, for example, is 200 times as sweet as sugar. So you're only using 1/200th of the amount, and sucralose is just this white fluffy stuff that doesn't do anything, right? So now you need to find ways to substitute that functionality of the sugar. Most commonly, what is used is erythritol. But there again, it is not a one-to-one substitute. Even though erythritol is much less sweet, it is also very slow in dissolving. So you need to kind of find a combination of erythritol and some other things that play the dance well. Sometimes certain modified starches will help, um, or things like
Malt will help a little bit of the less sweet malt,
yes,
but
less
not
sweet.
in this system. But I agree with you. Erythritol, that is like my favorite go-to sweetener.
Hmm. Hmm.
And definitely bulking, maybe like a resistant starch kind of bulking.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like a
Yeah.
resistant starch is perfect for this, right? And you only need a really small amount because you just need it to help do some of that structure binding for you, right? And
Right.
then in the baking is when the flour does all the work. And you just need it to hold all of that up so that it doesn't collapse during the baking, right?
Correct. Great. Thanks for all the tips. Um, let's go into more tips giving for gluten-free artisan bread. How's that discussion going, Mark?
That is a really, they have a very interesting bread that they have put together. And the main problem, what they're getting is they're getting a very tight and gummy interior, especially towards the bottom.
Mm,
So when we often talk about the temperature profile in baking, with gluten-free baking, with something that as large as this, as like a a loaf of bread, it becomes even more critical with gluten-free because you have so much more moisture in the system generally that has to be cooked off and or bound in the whole system to make sure that that is fully cooked through. So you don't want your arrival time to be too early because otherwise it hasn't had a chance to lift up enough. And and then once you hit that arrival time, you got to make sure you reach temperature and bake out so that all the starches are set. Otherwise, what happens is it starts to collapse as it comes out of the oven. Because the gluten-free systems are quite a bit different than regular bread, even though they have yeast and other things, but the whole starch system is quite a bit different.
yeah, I can't wait to see that product because I've really not seen a gluten-free artisan bread before. I think it's revolutionary.
Yeah, they,
In
they
a
it looks
way.
interesting, the pictures that they posted. It's not as open as a traditional
Mhm.
sourdough, and I
It's
think
gonna be
that's where
hard.
they,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
So yeah, I mean, most gluten-free bread is made are made from batters,
yep.
right? And
Hmm.
artisan bread is free form rolling by hand, and it's it bakes flat on the hearth, right?
Yep.
So that is the biggest challenge with gluten-free bread is not being able to hold that shape. So
Yeah, this seems to have some gums and or modified starches to try and accomplish that, right?
yeah, so
Which can
lots
be
and lots
tricky
of
because
butter.
again, they might set too quickly if it's
Correct,
getting the right mixture of everything, right?
correct. Yeah. All right, we have time for one more. Let's talk about frozen croissant and frozen dough production. I think the question there lies on the kind of yeast and the effect of freezing on yeast. Mark, what are your thoughts?
There's it seems simple on the surface, but it tends to be a rather complicated conversation at times, right? Um, in general, the basics of it is that so it's a combination of things. It's the right kind of yeast, the amount of yeast, protecting the yeast, and then most importantly, the freezing process. Because you can do everything right up front, but if you freeze too slow, what happens is you form very large ice crystals, and these ice crystals will pierce the cell essentially because they freeze right around the yeast cell and damage it. They
Kill them.
crush it, right? And so then it doesn't survive. So some of the general way of what people will do is first of all is they'll put 50% more yeast in, right? Anywhere from 25 to 50% is okay if you're doing a standard freezing method, meaning you're just using a regular freezer, not a blast freezer or liquid nitrogen or CO2 or things like that. Um, and so if you're freezing faster, you don't have to increase the yeast as much. And usually you want to get a yeast that is has more freeze tolerance from your supplier. There are also dough conditioners that help with that because it's not only the yeast that gets damaged, the gluten can get damaged as well in the freezing process. Um, High production processors use liquid nitrogen or CO2 to freeze very rapidly. This forms very small crystals and there's not so much expansion taking place, right? Expansion not rising, it's the water expands when it freezes, right? Um, and so if you're freezing in a regular freezer, like just a roll-in freezer, like a walk-in or freezer or thing, or just a spiral freezer or something like that, the important thing is then to make sure the product is spaced out enough that you have lots of air circulation so it'll freeze quickly. You can always pile them together in the box or something later on, but get them frozen first. That's the most important thing.
I really don't think a lot of bakers out there are freezing product experts, right? So when we talk about producing frozen dough products, exactly what you said, Mark. It's like blast freeze them as fast as you can and then pack them later. That
Yep.
is the best way to approach any kind of
Hmm.
frozen dough product.
Yep.
Another thing I wanted to add was dough temperature, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because we don't want to activate as much of the yeast as possible. A lot of us go really, really
Really
low
cool doughs.
dough,
Yep. Yep.
right? But some of us might go way beyond that, and this is why the dough conditioners are needed to make it,
Hmm.
process properly at the sheeter, divider, whatever it is. This is what
Hmm.
the dough conditioners are really for. But lower down the temperature so that you don't use too much yeast, and definitely never use non-freeze tolerant yeast, right?
Hmm.
I mean, yeast has come a long way in its journey. There are really good freeze tolerant yeast on the market right now. Reach out to your yeast experts, and yes, you do pay more, but you use less. So
Yes.
that's the give and take in all this thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah,
get like, don't
if
get
you're
phased by the
paying
price. It's worth it.
exactly, if you're paying 10 or 20% more, you're still winning instead of using 50% more, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
So,
yeah, Lalamund is a great supporter of that, and they can help you out with that. And
right.
is
Both
one of our
Lalaman and
sponsors. Yeah.
Lasaf have
And
really
Wasaf,
good
yep.
freezing. Yeah,
Hmm.
really good freeze resistant strain yeasts. So,
Yep.
yeah, absolutely. So there is a lot going on in our baking uh, industry professionals page, especially on Facebook. If
Yep.
you have any more questions or if you need help, the best way, like Mark usually emphasize, is ask better questions and then you
Hmm.
get better answers. So I think that's all for today, Mark. Do you have
Yep.
anything else to add?
No, just that, yeah, with the group is growing, and we have on average probably 3 or 4 new posts or questions every day, and it's great to see the community jumping in and supporting each other, and keep that up, and use the group, the forum groups on LinkedIn and Facebook to let us know how we're doing. What more would you like to see? What kind of podcasts and thought leadership Thursdays and stuff too. I mean, we're happy to oblige. It's your space in that sense.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Mark.
All right, thank you.
We
Have
will
a
see
great
you
weekend,
soon.
everybody. Yeah,
Bye bye.
bye.